I'm also curious about the ostensibly church-related program under which Robyn Anderson was traveling to New York and Washington, D.C. only weeks before the massacre. And about the redacted section of the report, this is document 10,635. When asked who devised the label of Trenchcoat Mafia, Robyn Anderson replied that initially she believed that Chris Morris attended a meeting some time ago to represent the Trenchcoat Mafia for their induction into this national organization. Let me read that again for the coincidence theorists. For all the goofs who think that the there's still goofs out there who think the Trenchcoat Mafia didn't even exist and it was made up, let alone expanding beyond the halls of Columbine High School. When asked who devised the label of Trenchcoat Mafia, Robyn Anderson replied that initially she believed that Chris Morris attended a meeting some time ago to represent the Trenchcoat Mafia for their induction into this national organization. So even if Robyn Anderson is mistaken here, what is causing her to say this? She then stated that no one else from Columbine High School attended this national level meeting and that the name Trenchcoat Mafia was just adopted by that group at her school. And then there's a whole bunch of redacted. There's multiple sentences here redacted. Then we have this. She also stated he wears a very dark green colored beret that looks black. She stated that as far as she has been told by Chris Morris, he's the only official member of the Trenchcoat Mafia. And that she feels he looks down on the others since they are not official members. That's actually really curious. So according to Robyn Anderson in document 10,635, she's stating here that there's some kind of national organization known as the Trenchcoat Mafia. Chris Morris is officially a member of the national organization, and then all the other members at Columbine are not official members. They're just under the generic label Trenchcoat Mafia. That's really curious, and how does she know this information? Robyn Anderson, of course, Dylan Klebold's close friend and date for the prom. Robyn Anderson, of course, the one who purchased the shotguns and rifle at the gun show from alleged CIA handlers. It gets a little complicated here, because Mark Maines was a co-worker at Blackjack Pizza. He sold Dylan the Tech DC-9 and went shooting with them at Rampart Range. Philip Duran, who introduced Dylan and Eric to Mark Maines, was in order to make the gun deal. And then Robyn Anderson is also involved in the purchase of guns. So we have this circle. Mark Maines, Philip Duran, Robyn Anderson. Robyn Anderson also claiming that there's some kind of national Trenchcoat Mafia that only Chris Morris is a part of. Why has this not been thoroughly addressed anywhere? I don't know, but this is MINDSHOCK, where we go down every rabbit hole. This is right on official document 10,635. And yet the coincidence theorists probably don't want to address this at all. Now, of course, there's the death education classes, all the occult connections. I mean, this is just flat out insanity. You have Brooks Brown, also in Brooks Brown, Tad Bowles, also connected to Sedalia, Colorado, all the cult activity there. And Robyn Anderson connected to some kind of church program, traveling to New York and Washington, D.C. weeks before the shooting. And also claiming Chris Morris is in a national Trenchcoat Mafia, also being the one to actually purchase weapons for Eric and Dylan from alleged CIA handlers. I mean, this is kind of crazy. Government Patsy also posted this. Document 8,245. All of this is sourced in the documentation. So, coincidence theorists, authority worshipping cultists who hallucinate that this is all made up conspiracy nonsense, it's all in the official documents. I mean, how lazy are the coincidence theorists and the Dunning-Kruger crowd who just dismiss all this as crazy conspiracy? It's all in the official documentation, and we haven't even seen all the redacted documents. If this is in the official release documents, one can only imagine what is contained in the redacted and unreleased documentation. Also worth pointing out here, the men who Robyn Anderson purchased one of the guns from were both career Pentagon employees. So again here we have 8,245 submitted by Marcus C. Mott, April 30th, 1999, Phoenix Field Division. Description of activity, report of interview. Synopsis: report of interview with Ron Hartman and Jim Washington at the Federal Bureau of Investigation office located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, April 30th, 1999. Narrative 1. April 30th, 1999. Mr. Ron Hartman and Mr. Jim Washington were interviewed at the FBI office in Colorado Springs. 2. Hartman and Washington state that Stevens Model 311D 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun by Savage, serial number A077513, was sold to an 18-year-old female on November 22nd, 1998. This 18-year-old female had just turned 18 a few weeks prior, and her age was confirmed by her Colorado driver's license. According to FBI Special Agent Keith Howland, Hartman and Washington were 100% sure the female was Robyn Anderson, and the young man who accompanied her, they are 80% sure it was Dylan Klebold. That's curious. They couldn't positively identify Klebold. 3. The sale of the shotgun was conducted by Anderson, who paid for the firearm in cash, which she produced. No receipt was given, and when the shotgun was handed to Anderson, Klebold took the firearm himself. 4. An FBI 302 report of interview is attached with a full narrative of the events surrounding this firearm transaction. Washington is employed as a senior investigative and security specialist with Defense Security Service, DSS, 1935 Jamboree Suite 170, Colorado Springs. Washington has been with the DSS for 17 years and has a total of 26 years of service with the United States government. Hartman served 20 years in the armed forces, with his time split between the U.S. Navy between 57 and 61 and the U.S. Air Force between 61 and 77. Upon retirement from the Air Force, he became a civilian employee of the United States government, first at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs and then with the Defense Logistic Agency in Ogden, Utah. Due to downsizing on the part of the U.S. government, when the program he was assigned to in Utah was shut down, he retired from the government and is currently unemployed. So these are the two guys that she bought the gun from? A guy who works for the Defense Security Service? Interesting. Very, very interesting. All coincidental, probably. Now, if this was a covert op, does all of this make sense? If it's a covert op involving this occult activity and government agents and handlers, all of a sudden, everything kind of makes sense. That's why all these people are hovering around these teenagers. Government Patsy with another follow-up post here. The backgrounds of the dealers are highly provocative. Washington's nominal employer, the Defense Security Service, was one of the successors of the Defense Industrial Security Clearance Office. DISCO, that's a great name. Formerly the Defense Industrial Security Command, DISC. An obscure government agency tasked with conducting investigations of individuals whose work requires a security clearance. It's now known as the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. So these are the guys that Robyn Anderson just happened to buy the gun from? Anybody else find that weird? Not to mention Mark Main's, Philip Duran, connections to Sedalia, which Brooks Brown, who many consider and insist maintain was not involved in anything, he just happens to also be in Sedalia, as well as Tad Bowles, one of the alleged founders. And Robyn Anderson claiming that Chris Morris is the only official member of the National Trenchcoat Mafia. How would she know about that? And she's buying a gun from these government contractors of obscure government agencies that require high-level security clearances. Anybody else find this weird? Does anybody else find this weird? So the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, they do background checks on prospective defense employees, from tax and employment records to interviews with friends, family, neighbors, etc., to determine whether they are eligible for a security clearance. Sometimes this extends to covert activity like surveillance of target individuals or planting a disco agent in a defense facility to pose as a subversive, to see if they can draw others out of the closet. There has been speculation that Lee Harvey Oswald was part of a disco operation, specifically in mid-63, when the reputed communist who had returned from the Soviet Union the previous year was inexplicably hired to work at a Dallas firm that did classified work for the U.S. Army. I mean, that's very curious. What do the coincidence theorists make of that? Their jurisdiction not only includes employees of the DoD and other government agencies, but also private contractors like Lockheed, Northrop, and Boeing. If an employee who already has a clearance is deemed a security threat, investigation of that individual similarly falls under this agency's purview. Naturally, this gives them a lot of power. They're essentially the internal security or police arm of the military-industrial complex, but how many people even know they exist? That's a good question, especially back in the 90s. In December 2004, the U.S. Army War College published a paper entitled Deception 101, Primer on Deception by Professor Joseph Cadell, U.S. Army War College External Research Program, from page 8 to 9. Quote, cover is the use of an apparently non-threatening activity to disguise preparation for or initiation of a hostile act. A common example is the use of a training exercise to hide preparations for an attack. If the training exercise was the last in a long series of training exercises, which had not led to actual hostile action in the past, this could also be an example of conditioning, hence the tendency to refer to conditioning and cover. The two concepts are linked by their complementary definitions. In recent years, both the Yom Kippur War of 1973 and the Falklands War of 1982 were launched under the cover of training exercises similar to exercises which had occurred before, end quote. Professor Cadell was a combat intelligence officer in the U.S. Air Force, 73 to 76, and has taught at the Defense Intelligence College, 77 to 93, Air War College, 83 to 89, Joint Military Intelligence Training Center, 93 to 97, and the National Intelligence University, where he has been a professor emeritus since 2014. So this guy clearly outlined what cover is and how training exercises are used. Now, does that sound familiar to any events that might have transpired in the years after Columbine, in the previous 20 years or so? Any of that sound familiar to anybody? And of course, at Columbine, all of these training exercises directly before the event. I mean, I guess the coincidence theorists are going to write all that off too. Research Columbine posted this. Sometimes the drills are publicized as the actual event, where they need to stage an event rather than creating a false flag out of a real event. I suspect a recent infamous shooting, I'm not going to name the school because for some reason social media does not like anybody talking about this particular event, was a drill that the media portrayed as a real event. And I'm starting to think that that particular shooter wasn't even a real person, and they planted him, whoever was doing the typing, on forums to establish a history to make him seem legit. Recently, someone anonymous that nobody can identify happened to find this particular shooter's YouTube channel from way back then out of nowhere. I don't buy it if it really is the shooter's voice, but I don't buy that just somebody happened to find it after all these years. What have they accomplished since Columbine? That would be a good place to start to figure out why. Perhaps it was the foundation for the 2000s in furthering the gun control agenda. Now, here's an interesting quote from Sue Klebold. Now, a lot of people have mixed opinions on Sue Klebold, but here's an interesting article from February 13th, 2016 in The Guardian. Quote, before the meeting, Tom and I were still convinced that Dylan had either been a reluctant participant or accidentally become entangled in something bigger than he understood at the time. We heard a rumor that military training materials on brainwashing techniques had been found in Eric Harris's home, which had refueled our belief that Dylan had been another victim of the tragedy. It was plausible. Eric's father did have a military background, end quote. So apparently there are a bunch of meetings to re-educate the Klebolds about what exactly happened. But again, mother's instinct here is stating that mother and father's instinct, they believed that Dylan had either been a reluctant participant or accidentally become entangled in something bigger than he understood at the time. Now, regarding Eric Harris, there are stories, I went over this in previous episodes, that because his father was at a military base in New York State where apparently Eric Harris was in the facility, and some allege that brainwashing began at that point. Also, apparently there was some handler, at least he claimed, Eric Harris mentioned that he had to go to some guy's house like once a week, possibly some kind of CIA or upper government agent for some reason. The coincidence theorists probably say that was some kind of counselor or something. Either way, highly suspicious without identifying exactly who that was. And John Quinn is the one who claims that there's evidence that Eric Harris was subjected to mind control experiments at Plattsburgh Air Force Base, tied to MK Ultra.